I'm going to introduce you to the new Republican scam, same as the old Republican scam, in just a second. And be sure to subscribe. Trump's budget is out, or is about to come out, but we know the broad outline of it. And it's going to do just extraordinary damage to red state America, by and large, to working class white people, the people who voted for Donald Trump. It's going to do just extraordinary damage to them. And he wants to cut $1.1 trillion. This is over a 10-year period. $1.1 trillion from Medicaid. And Medicaid is the health care program that, in those states that have done Medicaid expansion, that is available to the working poor. Medicaid is, in that context, kind of a subsidy for McDonald's and Walmart and all those other companies that pay really, really low wages, because if you make so little that you qualify for Medicaid, then you work for basically Trump's America, and so the question that I'm asking, actually, let me get right to this. Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post over the weekend wrote that essentially Trump's supporters are the stupidest, most gullible people on earth, right? He said, quote, "He apparently believes his loyal supporters are the dumbest, most gullible people on earth. We'll see if he's right." And then he goes through the list of, lies Trump has told and promises that he's broken. Mexico's not paying for the wall. The trade deficit has gone up. The tax cut for working people didn't happen. Korea hasn't denuclearized. He hasn't replaced the Affordable Care Act with something better. No infrastructure, no drain the swamp. But when you look at this budget, $327 billion being cut from anti-poverty programs. These are programs that are keeping a lot of rural America alive. Now, yeah, they may be big among, African Americans in the inner cities, which is pretty much all Republicans want to talk about when they're talking about these programs. But the fact of the matter is, more white people are on food stamps than black people or Hispanic people. More white people are taking discounted housing. More white people, it's just... He wants to cut $207 billion out of federally guaranteed student loan programs. He wants to cut $200 billion out of the federal retirement programs. The Democrats have said this thing is dead on arrival. It's going to lock in trillion-dollar-a-year budgets forever. Well, at least until there's a Democratic president. And then, of course, the two Santa Claus theory kicks in, and the Republicans all start screaming about, "Oh, my God, it's a budget deficit. We can't have this. You got to quick cut Social Security," even though that has nothing to do with the budget. Harry Truman called this out years ago. Back in 1948, it was October 13th, in fact, 1948, in St. Paul, Minnesota. Harry Truman was running for president. The election was, about 3 weeks later. And in St. Paul, Minnesota, Harry Truman had this to say about the GOP.
Now, I've been studying the Republican Party for over 12 years at close hand in the capital of the United States. And by this time, I have discovered where the Republicans stand on most of the major issues. Since they won't tell you themselves, I'm going to tell you. They approve the American farmer, but they're willing to help him go broke. They stand four square for the American home, but not for housing. They are strong for labor, but they are stronger for restricting labor's rights. They favor a minimum wage. The smaller the minimum, the better. They endorse educational opportunity for all, but they won't spend money for teachers or for schools. They think modern medical care and hospitals are fine for people who can afford them. They approve of Social Security benefits, so much so that they took them away from almost 1 million people. They favor the admission of displaced persons, but only within shameful racial and religious limitations. They consider electric power a great blessing, but only when the private power companies get their rake off. They condemn cruelly high prices, but fight to the death every effort to bring them down. They think the American standard of living is a fine thing, so long as it doesn't spread to all the people. and they admire the government of the United States so much that they would like to buy it.
But basically, what Truman, and what we're seeing right now is, meet the new Republicans, same as the old Republicans. This is where I was going with that. And in fact, where I'm going after that is that Richard Nixon and Pat Buchanan basically laid out the campaign strategy that Donald Trump is using. I mean, just very straightforward. In fact, there's a piece by Lawrence Jordan about this in today's Washington Post, how Richard Nixon charted the path for Donald Trump's reelection. And it goes back to Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan was Richard Nixon's speechwriter. And, Nixon ran on the platform of, quote, putting and keeping America first. That was Nixon's slogan. This was in 1992. And his themes were construction of the wall on the Mexican border, a renegotiation of our trade deals, and demanding that our allies take greater responsibility for their own defense. Sound familiar? This was what Pat Buchanan laid out for Richard Nixon. And then again in 72, Nixon, this was Nixon's shtick, right? So then Trump comes along. Oh, and Buchanan said, label the Democrats as socialists. Now in 72, Nixon was running against George McGovern. And Buchanan wrote a memo saying, we're going to have a real problem with George McGovern. He is, quote, a candid, honest, straightforward citizen politician. He was also a war hero. Flew 30-some-odd bombing missions and was shot down and rescued his crew and the whole thing. George McGovern. And so Buchanan, this is from today's Washington Post, Buchanan crafted a plan to undermine McGovern's campaign by portraying him as both an extremist and as a pet of the national liberal establishment. Buchanan told Nixon, quote, you need to scare the hell out of the American people about George McGovern and convince them that his policies would be an utter disaster for the country. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. Call him a socialist. Well, it worked in 72. Nixon beat George McGovern quite badly. Pat Buchanan's playbook actually worked. So the question is, will it work again? Because now we've had, more than 50 years to look at these Republican strategies and realize that they're crazy, they're bunk, they're BS, they're not true. So, is it still going to work? Or was, Harry Truman won re-election in 48 basically saying these things. Although he lost in 52 to Dwight Eisenhower. But Dwight Eisenhower wasn't using Pat Buchanan's playbook. Dwight Eisenhower was also kind of running as a Democrat. In fact, right up until just, the year before the election, they didn't know if Eisenhower was going to be a Democrat or Republican. He was just a war hero. And he ran on a campaign of ending the Korean War. He ran on a peace platform. He ran on the Tulsi Gabbard platform. So the question, is it true? Do you think it's absolutely true that Trump supporters are the stupidest, most gullible people on earth? Or are they the victims of billionaire Rupert Murdoch's media empire